Well, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graban, and we're joined today by Cliff Bluestein. He is the president and CEO of a company, Apus Health. They're a medical device company. He is an adjunct professor at the NYU Stern School of Business, and he is also a urologist. So it's quite an interesting background. And Cliff, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Mark.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure, and we'll dive right in. I think this will trigger a lot of good conversation. Cliff, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake was really at a prior company where I was charged at leading a large consultancy practice. And when I came into the practice from the outside, ultimately you want to evaluate your teams and see what you're doing. And you often look in multiple areas to see that the strategy, structure, people, process, technology are all aligned. And it became very clear, having gone out on a roadshow to speak with our customers, that what they really wanted from us as a company was to bring to them solutions. And that the current structure of our organization was around technologies, in particular, specific types of electronic health record, like an Epic program or Cerner program. And we really spent ultimately the next, 3 to 6 months thinking through what are solutions, how can we deliver them, what does that look like in the marketplace, what kind of things would our customers really value, and what are the people that we have in order to deliver and execute on that. We spent a lot of time actually looking at every individual within the organization, which was no small feat because we were talking about hundreds of people. And we ultimately decided and figured out what we thought would be a really good composition of teams to deliver solutions. And really over a period of several months, we figured out the new organizational structure, the new solution stacks. We then got engagement, or we thought we had engagement of all of the leaders to really drive this. And we thought through what the sales pitches were going to be and what was the information they needed. How would we message this to our teams and our people? And then really over the course of a weekend, we ultimately then switched about half of the team's managers to new teams and had our all new solutions to go to the market. And, we immediately expected that the teams would get together and start working on figuring out, how they're going to deliver solutions, what are the capabilities and what that would look like. And what we found was business as usual. Really nothing changed. And within the first, couple of weeks, only some of the groups really started to come back with really interesting solutions to the problems that we were trying to solve. And what was more interesting was we started to get feedback from a lot of our top performers. And a lot of our top performers actually came back and were not happy with their new managers. So it was kind of an interesting problem where all of a sudden we thought we were going to go around, build some great solutions, and we're going to have great teams that are really engaged. And we started to find some really, really unhappy people. What we learned from this was that a lot of the managers that we thought were going to be able to be agile and change actually really didn't have any intention of changing at all. And many of the people that were our top performers actually got frustrated when they were put with new managers who weren't really trying to drive the change. It's kind of an interesting problem for an organization that you're trying to turn around to make sure from a strategic perspective that we're going to be aligned with what the markets want. So there was a clear change in the marketplace. We had to address it, and either we changed or the business probably would not thrive into the future.
So it seems like there's maybe two different levels of what was going on there related to organizational structure. Some of this might have been before your time coming in, but why did things get to a point where there was that misalignment? Was it because of evolution in the marketplace and there was need to adapt, or was there a kind of a deeper misunderstanding of we have technologies versus customers want solutions? That's kind of a common challenge.
It's a great question. I think that the structure of the organization was consistent with how the work is delivered. So normally when you're delivering your solutions, you're delivering individual technologies, or the skill sets that you need come from certain technology groups or families. And it made sense to organize from a delivery perspective into those solution stacks. I think the market very clearly changed. And what we heard from our customers, for example, was if you look at electronic health records, there are many platforms out there that hospital systems use, Epic, Cerner, Express Scripts, and so on. And when we went to our customers, many of them said, listen, Cliff, we use more than one platform. We're not only using one solution. So if you're going to come to help us, you need to be able to deliver solutions that understand the complexity of our organizations and the fact that we have multiple different EMR platforms running across our organization, and how do we manage that? Mm-hmm. And that partly is a market force that drove us to really try and think differently. So I think it was just a natural evolution of where it was going. I also think it's a contrast between how you sell and how you deliver. And I think that there's often a contrast in many organizations between really the sales arm and the delivery arm. Yeah. And in consultancy, usually the sales arm and the delivery arm are one and the same.
Uh-huh. And was there an issue? Is it a matter of the customer was wanting a single point of contact, and they were having to interact with different sales or support contacts for those different technologies, as opposed to having something that seemed more integrated from their perspective?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one part of it. I think many organizations find it very hard to deal with larger, complex organizations because they don't know who to call to get a solution. I think many companies, like my prior one, actually had really good account management. So you had an account manager that was supposed to be the point person, but they're usually still bringing in other teams that are bringing the products to the market to solve whatever problems they happen to have. So I do think that part of it has to do with how do you interact with a single point of contact. It's just easy.
Yeah. So then I think the second part, it seems, of the scenario, the first part was, okay, well, how did it get to be that way? And then there was recognition that it has to change. When I heard you say, nothing changed and people were unhappy, is this something that could be framed as some people might call a change management issue? Like, was it the wrong solution, or was there something about the approach that didn't get people on board, whether that was the managers or those top performers?
Many times people talk about culture, eating strategy for lunch. Mm-hmm. I actually think that that's kind of a misnomer. And my experience has been, and this was a perfect learning example of it, it's all about the people. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately there are many individuals out there that are very comfortable with change and that are able to manage through in a very agile way all of the different factors that are coming into play. And I think, frankly, there are other individuals that really just are not comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. I think that what we learned very quickly, fortunately, was to be able to identify those individuals that would be able to change. And we very quickly promoted up or enhanced the responsibilities for those individuals that were very comfortable with change. And we really either demoted or changed the role for those individuals that didn't want to change. And it's not that they're not good people, it's just everyone has a different skill set and a different capability. So we needed to change. We know that we needed to change. We found the people that could help us execute on that and then promoted them up. And I think that was able to fix a lot of the challenges that you brought up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with your assessment. If somebody is seeming resistance to change, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It's just people are complicated. Change is a process, as some would say. I'm curious. I want to ask a few questions about being a physician, being a urologist. And, I'm just kind of thinking of, in my work in healthcare, I've been exposed to people who are trying to they're trying to help patients change behaviors. for different reasons. And that's easier for some people to change behaviors from things related to things that affect their health or their medical condition. Were there any lessons learned or things that you can think of more broadly in medicine and treating patients when it comes to helping patients accept and embrace change?
The answer is patient engagement is one of the most difficult challenges in all of healthcare. Mm-hmm. I think this is a problem that a lot of people have been trying to solve for. I think at my current company, Apos Health, our approach to patient engagement is that we believe we need to meet patients wherever they want to meet with us. And the answer to that is to try and think through a truly customer-centric view. I think much of healthcare was structured, frankly, from a physician perspective. So how do we deliver healthcare from either the hospital's efficiency or the physician's efficiency or the care provider's efficiency, as opposed to truly thinking about how does the patient want to interact with us. And so we do what's called omni-channel, marketing. We send text messages to patients. We create chatbots. We send them emails. We do video conferencing. We do in-person visits. And we try and meet them wherever and however they want to meet with us. And we believe that, you may get 5% of the people through text messaging. You may get another 5 to 10 from an app. There are some others that, frankly, just want to see you in person. They don't want to talk to a machine. They don't want a chatbot. They don't want to go online and get answers there. There are others that are happy to speak with an AI-driven chatbot. And so I think healthcare really needs to change. And until we change and become more customer-centric, we will not get the engagement that companies like Facebook, like most of the banks do today, and many other companies.
Mm-hmm. So it might help, if you can provide a little bit of context about Apos Health. What are the products, or maybe we can frame it in terms of solutions, because you talk about that difference. Who is the customer? Is it who's purchasing this? Is it the physicians, the patients? It's probably complicated.
Yeah, unfortunately, nothing in healthcare is easy. Everything is complex, but we are an FDA-cleared medical device for the treatment of knee osteoarthritis with temporary improvement in pain and function. So our strategy to the market was to get payer coverage. Once we had payer coverage, we then went out to create what I would say is our distribution network, or those healthcare providers, traditionally physical therapists, orthopedic surgeons, pain doctors, that administer the therapy. And really, our therapy is a shoe-like device that gets these pods underneath it that get, based upon gait parameters, customized to an individual patient. And then our real consumer is the patient who has knee osteoarthritis. If you look at that demographic or that market, it tracks very similar with knee osteoarthritis. So roughly 60% women, 40% men. The target age is roughly, 59 to 60 years of age, since that's when the incidence of knee osteoarthritis is really at its greatest.
Yeah. And so how do you frame, or what were the lessons learned from the previous company about framing all of this as clearly there is technology, but then it seems like from a solution standpoint, the thing in terms of patient benefit, what were some of the lessons learned in terms of kind of communicating and getting acceptance of something new on the market?
Yeah, it's all about what's in it for me. Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, people want to know that whatever it is you're doing is going to be of value to them. Our product, they really find valuable because it helps to alleviate their pain and improve their function. And many of our patients have suffered for an average for 6 to 8 years with knee pain. They've often tried and failed other treatment modalities like injections and physical therapy and pain medication. So when they have something new that they can try that's non-surgical, they like that as a solution. And if it works, which it does, then they get real benefit out of that. Yeah. So unless you can figure out a way to drive value to the end user, they're not going to want to use it.
Yeah, and as you framed it, the what's in it for me, that clear benefit seems important, whether it's maybe something medical or even back to the story that you were telling, the what's in it for me. If we were to say, hey, do you want this new technology on your foot? People might say, well, no, I don't want that. What they want is less pain and the other benefits that come with it. That seems clear. Organizational issues, like you were describing, I wonder, was there a clear what's in it for me for those managers or for those performers in terms of, embracing that change that they were thrown into?
It's a great question that we didn't probably contemplate at the time. I think at the time, honestly, we were really more focused on what did our consumer want. And I think one of the mistakes we made in implementing this was probably not really addressing that issue as well as we should have, and making sure that they understood what the value to them was. And I don't think we clearly articulated that either. I think from our perspective, we were looking at it as business unit leaders as we need to improve sales. We need to improve utilization of our consultancy. We need to get the solutions out to the marketplace, and that you should want to do this because if you don't do this, you're not going to have a job. Mm-hmm. And while that is a what's in it for me, it really is not ultimately the kind of driver that's going to be effective in influencing others and winning hearts and minds. So I think that probably was an additional mistake that we did at the time in terms of not clearly articulating the what's in it for them as well as we should have and probably could have.
Well, thank you for sharing that, that reflection on that. And think of, it's great to be customer focused, but, part of what I hear you saying is that there are other stakeholders and people we need to have accepting, if not enthusiastic of that change, so it can benefit the customers and therefore the organization. So,
yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is focus. When you're an organization and you're trying to make change, you can really only focus on so many things. And one of the challenges is how do you find the right balance between all of the different stakeholders? Because no matter what initiative you're trying to do, you're always touching multiple stakeholders, and it's hard to focus on all of them all of the time. Doesn't mean you don't try and plan for it, right. But in the midst of the day-to-day activities, it's hard to focus on more than 2 to 3 things and do it really well. So I think while we could have done that better, it's about balance, right? You can only spend so much time in moving an organization, and people can really only focus on so many things. So I think stakeholder management's a really important concept. Mm-hmm. I think not everyone does it well, and I think part of the hardest part is to really focus in on who's your most important stakeholder, and then what are the next round of them, and what can you do to touch as many as you possibly can, or at least manage it?
Yeah. So I also want to ask, I want to ask basically the same question, asking you to kind of, think of, 2 different proverbial hats. First off, as a clinician, and then secondly, as CEO of Apus Health. So, with your urologist hat on, thinking as a physician, what are some of your thoughts or reflections? Here on the podcast, we talk so much about learning from mistakes, which means, an openness about mistakes. What are your thoughts about, that culture in your experience in medicine?
Medicine has a history of being extraordinarily conservative. Mm-hmm. And some would say conservative to the point where they struggle to adopt new innovations and technologies. And while the number often changes, they often say the time between when a new technology is started and actually implemented is at least 17 years. And some people go up or down on that number, but 17 years is a really long time for adoption of anything. I'm a firm believer that if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not moving aggressively enough. You're probably not taking enough risk. And ultimately, you're really hurting yourself in terms of innovation. Choosing to do nothing or nothing new is a strategy, and it's rarely a good one. So I'm a firm believer in making mistakes. I tell my team all of the time, that it's okay to make mistakes. Let's identify the mistakes. Let's not lay blame. Let's just figure out why they happened, what happened, how do we fix it going forward, and what do we have to learn from it. Because if people are afraid to make mistakes, then they're also afraid to make decisions. And what you really don't want is to make people afraid to make decisions. So in any organization, what I would say is if you're not making mistakes, that probably means you're not giving the people on the ground enough ability to make choices and make decisions on their own and empowering them. And I think it's really important to empower your teams. I think it's important to identify mistakes. You asked, where does that come from? As a physician, as a surgeon, we used to have something called morbidity and mortality conferences. What a morbidity and mortality conference is actually a protected environment. So anything that is disclosed in a morbidity and mortality conference can't be disclosed in a court of law. What that actually does is that allows you to look at something that may not have happened the way you would have liked it to in terms of a surgical outcome, or in other words, a complication, and then in an open forum, have a conversation with other doctors who are in your field and sometimes outside of your field about, did you make a mistake? What could you have done differently? Did you miss something? Should you have thought of something differently? Okay, when it happened, how did you manage it? And did you manage it appropriately? And what would you have done differently after the fact? And I think that that's a wonderful forum to really learn and grow from. And I think, because I had that experience as a surgical resident, I think I try and emulate that in the business world as well. Hey, what happened this week? What went wrong? What could we have fixed? How do we move ahead and not lay blame? And I think because of that, you can innovate and move quickly.
Well, I think that's a really important and transferable cultural trait. You talk about the M&M conferences and that open forum in the agile software space. People talk about doing retrospectives, which I think is intended to have a similar in the military. I think people used phrases like after action review. This similar idea. And, it's just got me thinking of like people who are, let's say in a sales environment, software sales, consulting sales. Let's say you thought you had some big deal and you end up losing it because they went to a competitor or they decided not to move forward at all. It would be interesting to do that same sort of M&M review of, kind of a blame-free, not who blew the deal kind of discussion, but what do we think happened? What do we know? What are we learning from that? What are we doing moving forward? That seems like an interesting thing that other types of businesses could embrace.
We used to actually do that in our consultancy. We actually, when we lost, we'd call up the client and we'd ask if we could do a debrief with them and say, listen, we know we lost. That's okay. Can we actually have an open and honest conversation about what did we do well? What could we have done better? And why did we lose? And what's important about that is to make sure that you're getting the real answer. Many times, because it's easy, they'll just say, well, you cost too much, or the other people had a better pitch or a better skill set. I think it's often important to make sure you're asking, the second, the third, the fourth questions to make sure you're really getting to what the problem is. Because I think many times when you do these debriefs, everybody wants to take the easy, superficial reason as to why you lost. And it's very rarely because your pricing was too much or so it's important to really delve into that because my experience was we never lost because of pricing. If somebody really liked us and they thought we cost too much, they'd call you up and say, you guys cost too much.
Got to come down. Yeah.
Can you come down? And if you come down on your price and you still scope it out, we'll give you this engagement, but you're way too expensive. And that was always the solution. So I always made sure to ask 2, 3, 4 clarifying questions to make sure that we got to the real meat of the matter.
Yeah. In my professional space, we would talk about getting to the root cause, or at least digging beneath the surface. And that's why, I distinguished what do we think happened and what do we know happened. Like, coaches, people who have coached me in problem solving, and you think losing a deal is a problem to kick in the problem solving mode. What do we know and how do we know it? Are we making assumptions versus having real fact? And I like what you said about asking those follow-up questions where, let's say somebody might say like, well, we thought you weren't a good fit. I don't know what that means, right? So you have to ask follow-ups and try to get more specific, it seems.
Yeah, and honestly, many times I found our debriefs to completely meaningless after a pitch. There are some pitches we said, oh, we nailed it, and we weren't even to the next round. And other ones we thought we did a horrible job, and somehow we won the deal. So I think your own impressions of yourselves often isn't the best reflection. That's why I always like to get external people. Even when we practiced, we used to practice with other groups that had nothing to do with us to see how we came across.
Interesting. There's really a good lesson there. And before we wrap up, I was going to ask one other follow-up question. You talk about sort of that conservative approach or being slow. I've heard ballpark 20 years, like you said. So order of magnitude, that same scale. And there are many, many historical examples going back more than 100 years of changes that were slow to be embraced. And, I think of the one expression that you hear attributed to medicine, first do no harm. And it seems like, that might lead, certainly like as a patient, I want my medical team to be careful. So rushing into some new technology could cause harm, but it seems like there are certain situations where being too slow to embrace or adopt or approve new medications or new technologies could cause harm in a different way. What are your thoughts? Since I realize it's probably a difficult question. How do you strike that balance? Not going too quickly, not going too slow.
So again, as a physician, we all take the Hippocratic Oath and we all believe, primum non nocere, at first do no harm. So I understand that. I think, if you look at an example in the drug world, there's two approaches. One where you will not approve a drug until you've pretty much tested on animals, tested on small humans, done dosing trials, then done it on larger groups, and then you've shown that there are no side effects and everything else. And it's a very long and expensive process that often costs billions of dollars to bring it to market. There's another philosophy that says, listen, let's bring it to market faster. Let's do a little bit less testing. Let's do it on humans. Let's make sure that it, at first blush seems to be safe and effective, and really do a tremendous amount of post-marketing surveillance. And they're just diametrically opposed points of view. One, you're trying to prevent any harm from happening before you ever bring it to market, which has some advantages and disadvantages, versus the other end of the spectrum, which is bring it to market very quickly. And then after you bring it to market, you make sure that it's still safe. And there is no right and there is no wrong answer. I personally have a bias more towards the latter, which is bring it to market faster and test it very, very closely for any form of post-marketing problems that arise out of it, because ultimately you never know in either method if there are going to be challenges afterwards. And I'd rather make sure that regardless of the path that's taken, that you're continuing to monitor it very tightly for bad outcomes. And I think you also risk adjust it. There are some things that are extraordinarily low risk. So why wouldn't you want to bring it to market very quickly versus some other things like some drugs and gene therapy and other things that may be a little bit higher risk of having an untoward effect?
Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting. So our guest today has been Dr. Cliff Bluestein. He is the president and CEO at Apus Health. And Cliff, I want to thank you. I think there's interesting opportunities to kind of think through and connect the dots, your story from sort of enterprise technology, sales and solutions, medicine, lessons from surgery, and leading a company like you do today. So thank you very much for sharing all of that and for being a guest.
Mark, thank you very much for having me. I appreciated the opportunity.